event, all the people who attended, you'll be given an email with all the questions and the answers, and a link, more importantly, to YouTube, where you can watch us all over again on the PCS YouTube video site. Okay, and there are some other seminars, so if you missed them, you'll be able to go in and view those as well. Okay, now we've got Richard Law, hopefully providing British Sign Language interpretation. If you need to use live captions, go to the text, that's where the text appears at the bottom of the screen. Go to the three dots at the top of the screen and turn on live captions. Just be aware, live captions doesn't always capture my accent, so sometimes it will make it sound like I'm speaking rubbish because it doesn't pick up around my accent. Because you might have noticed I'm not from the south, I'm from the frozen wastes of the north. This is all being recorded, by the way, so obviously that's for YouTube, so be mindful that it is being recorded. Okay, and one more thing, when chat opens, you do still get your break, but obviously you would need to tap your questions in during the break so that they can be submitted to me. So I think I've covered everything. So without further ado, what I am about to do is introduce our first guest speaker, Judy Woods. Judy Woods? That's not right, is it?
No, Hunt is the right name.
Judy Hunt. I'll tell you, Judy Woods is actually a place near where I live, where I used to go play, and it was just on my brain. But welcome, Judy. I'm just going to find your biography because I've lost it. Just whistle amongst yourselves. It was all going so well. So I'm back online again now. Judy was married to Paul Hunt, who started the Union of the Physically Impaired Against Segregation, an early disability rights organisation in 1970. The organisation established the principles which led to the social model of disability. Through her connection to Paul, Judy became a close disability ally. While Judy isn't significantly impaired herself and wouldn't describe herself as disabled, she has nonetheless become very involved with some very significant historical developments. Over the years, Judy had a career as a teacher, working in various parts of the public sector linked with disability, and saw firsthand many changes taking place. After Paul died, Judy was then a working single parent with her son, but Judy still continued her involvement in disability politics and liberation struggles for many years. And it's this background, and with much persuasion from Paul's political comrades in the Union of the Physically Impaired Against Segregation, that Judy finally researched and published the book, No Limits. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me. I feel very, very honoured, really. So this is your Disability History Month, and my role really is to look at some of that history. History is made up of many strands, taken forward down many paths and by many people. But today I shall take one particular thread and weave my way through it to see its progress through the years. For I believe it is one of the most significant components of the disabled people's movement to emerge in the last 60 years. I plan to divide my contribution into about 5 parts. Firstly, to look at disabled people and the class struggle and why disability is significant. Secondly, some of the early history since the World War II, particularly since the 1960s. The early history of the liberation struggle by disabled people. Fourthly, independent living, the struggle for control and emergence of 2 models of service in the UK. and where we are now, and the pressures and threats that we can learn, and how we can learn from the history. In a nutshell, disability in all its different manifestations is about not having control of your life. It means that for many people, as you know all too well, personal ambitions and aspirations are frustrated and remain unrealized because of so many barriers in your way. In many instances, people have been cut off from mainstream society and even shunted off into segregated facilities with minimum control of their lives. At best, disability is a huge waste of human potential. At worst, it is enforced dependency and oppression of a largely powerless minority. Embedded within this denial of a full life, people individually and collectively have sought solutions and ways to improve both their personal quality of life and society. As we know, the gap between those that have and those that do not have is getting much wider all the time, and it seems an increasingly inflexible hierarchy of opportunities and rewards. So it's a depressing picture to be working in at the moment. Disabled people are statistically amongst the most disadvantaged in society, and this is for a variety of reasons. Being more likely to be unemployed is one. Being impoverished of the necessary means and struggling to get by with most fundamental needs and remaining unmet is another. And aggravating all this is the aggressive government policies to reduce welfare support systems. In earlier this year, Jenny Morris wrote in her blog, since 2010, changes in the benefit system, particularly those introduced in 2016, have had the impact of making disabled people poorer, increased food bank use and driven up debt levels. This inequality and its impact on their death rate amongst disabled people during the pandemic is therefore a direct result of government policy. The disabled people's movement has been about reclaiming control, having choice, making decisions and realising aspirations. Because our society has been constructed historically in ways that excluded so many, the DPM has gone to the heart of the matter when it challenged all social structures that denied people their rights and a part in the mainstream. In 1970, disabled people in Britain made a significant discovery with the foundation of a disabled people's liberation movement. It was here that new ideas changed the way disability was to be seen and understood. I'm going to come back to that. Just going back a bit into the early history, I want to look at the period from the 60s. Contrary to the history books, social history is not in general made up by great leaders and great figureheads, but by social pressures arising from below, from the groundswell of discontent coming from oppressed sections of society. But sometimes, with hindsight, we can see that certain individuals do emerge to play an unusually significant role in history that leaves a legacy with a wide reach. One such person was the late Paul Hump. I want to talk a little about Paul as the founder member of the Union of the Physically Impaired, and a little bit about his earlier life experience. He was disabled from early childhood and spent much of his early years in segregated schools, hospitals, and like many others in similar circumstances, doomed at the age of 16 to life in a chronic ward, and it was intolerable. In 1956, age 19, he escaped and went to live at Lee Court, Cheshire home. And he very soon became involved in a series of resident struggles with the authorities of that institution for more control of their lives and for representation on management. This was unheard of. Paul had incredible determination and perseverance. He played a crucial role in this very collective and united struggle, which became an informative and dynamic period feeding a much later development. Over 14 years, he emerged as a residence leader and regular writer in various publications and newspapers, always pursuing and developing his deeply held views about representative democracy and the community. Whilst there, he started forming his ideas about the meaning of disability and about the discrimination and prejudice people were up against. The Leigh Court residents had raised many questions about the helper-helped relationship, about powerlessness being imposed on top of their impairments, and about the role medicalisation as a sickness model played in their lives as a form of social control. I was working at Leigh Court in the 60s, and in the course of time, Paul and I came together, married, and moved to London. And in 1970, we quickly became involved in various ongoing national disability campaigns, particularly around poverty, education, lack of employment opportunities, and lack of mobility. There were already, by then, many groups of and charities competing for resources to tackle the multitude of issues needing to be done. Disabled people were disadvantaged in so many ways, and rarely given access to mainstream schools, colleges, universities, or open employment. It was a time when we had a welfare state, but it just wasn't delivering. Disabled people and their sympathisers were responding to the massive lack of opportunities, and in the course of this struggle, they began to address the lack of people's human rights. However, disabled people themselves found they were being sidelined in the management of the many organisations they were then joining. They were not listened to, they were not in control, and that priorities were being set by non-disabled professionals, relatives, social reformers, etc. And they were not necessarily their priorities. So, to move on, when a new organisation rose, with disabled people firmly in control, who were determined to look at all this afresh and identify what really needed to change, and in a fundamental way, it was highly significant. It was here that Paul re-entered the story, having learned from their experiences at Leigh Court, Cheshire Home, and fully aware of the growing discontent in the community. He took his ideas to a wider stage. He wanted to establish a democratic consumer organisation controlled by disabled people, from which they could represent their own perspectives and ways ahead. And he wrote to The Guardian in 1972 to invite others to join you. And this is what became UPIAS. They very quickly decided that physically impaired people could join, only significantly physically impaired people could join them, to decide what was needed. If people had non-physical impairments but considered themselves to be disabled, they could join. The important issue was how they identified themselves alongside other disabled people, not by outward appearances. Paul drafted a detailed policy statement which formed the basis of 18 months intense discussion and analysis. And without going into any details about the organisation, they formed various important principles. But out of that came this new definition of disability as a social construct. And I'm just going to, most of you know all about that, but I'm going to just put it in very straightforward terms, because I think we always need to remind ourselves. UPIAS produced a new definition of disability, which came to be known as the social model. It said it was not a person's impairments that caused them to be disabled and disadvantaged. It was society that was organised in ways that excluded people with impairments. It was not disabled people who needed to adapt to fit into the society, but society that needed to adapt and change to make it fit for disabled people to fully participate. In fact, disabled people should not try and fit in, but demand change. Overthrowing the medical model was incredibly important to them. This had dominated all thinking everywhere, in public service policy, legislation, professional training, and social attitudes in thoughts about themselves by disabled people. So removing this mask of false consciousness became the key to emancipation. Ubiquitous was very small and overstretched, and the task ahead was huge. There needed to be a social social movement to press for change, and that became the next stage of the struggle to set up the BCOTP, and in due course that accepted the social definition and took the social definition to Disabled People's International, which also accepted this view of disability. This was a remarkable achievement of spreading the social concept across the world, and it owed much to Vic Finkelstein. He was a very important activist at the time, instrumental in producing the original formulation for the social definition and arguing for its adoption in the UK and internationally. I'm going to move on very quickly to a very important struggle that emerged then, which was in the early 80s about how to facilitate people to live independently in the community and create new solutions so that people didn't have to live in institutions or with their parents. So, and for this, housing and support was absolutely crucial. The context was the UK welfare state with its principles of universalism for public services, but the services as such as they existed were top-down, hierarchical, professionally controlled, and professional solutions. Now, throughout the 70s and 80s, disabled people became increasingly unhappy with the status quo and started to take the initiative. And two models emerged. Model A, I should call it, accepted the universalist principle of the welfare state, but wanted to change the service model. In this new vision, disabled people and service providers would work in co-partnership, sharing the power in decisions and management of staff and resources. And underlying this was acceptance of the social model in the design of new services. For that, coalitions and centres of integrated living based on the social model emerged to take them forward. Model B rejected the welfare state model and opted for individual solutions with direct payments. This was to maximise choice and control over life decisions, to liberate people to hire and fire their own help, to design self-assessments as a basis for negotiating state-funded direct payments. Coalitions and centres for independent living based on the social model emerged to take this forward. With the new wave of Thatcher's monetarist Britain favouring individual solutions and welfare departments transformed into a marketplace, Model B survived, whilst Model A did not. Looking ahead now at a situation of total chaos in the social care sector, I believe both models can be useful to us. So just very quickly where we are now, and the threats, and how we can learn from this history to struggle for a better future. The attacks on disabled people services have come from all directions: cuts to direct payments, local authorities, struggling private agencies, and splintered and uneven distribution of services and resources. The big threat now comes from the re-establishment of a medical hegemony over the management of health and social care promoted by this government. This will adopt its overarching medical model of disability to manage care solutions. It is less likely to be interested in the services that support independent living under people's direct control, lack of user representation, and a poorly paid, very exploited workforce is likely to predominate. The escalation of private monopolies with Medicare solutions, with US influence and investment is alarming. To take an early warning of what might be in store, I strongly recommend you to read Martha Russell's book, Beyond Ramps, on the impact that the US system had on disabled people in America. I'm sorry, I haven't got the date of publication with me, but it's in No Limits. It is time for disabled people to offer a lead again, drawing on experiences and working collaboratively with sections of the workforce who also have much to gain and offer from partnership working.
Hi, Judy. I'll need you to wind up in a couple of minutes, if that's okay.
Absolutely. We have a very strong history of trade unionism, and we also have a strong history of struggles for a fairer society adopting universalist principles. There are now a number of organisations striving with these ideas. In his book, Peter Beresford suggests a welfare policy for 21st century would offer social solutions using the social model, reintroduce universalism, create co-partnerships and user input at all levels. Reclaiming Our Futures Alliance, ROFA, is also working along these lines with its independent living for the future, our vision of a national independent living support system. And there are others. There's Reclaim Social Care Group, there's Disability News Service, Disabled People Against Cuts, Inclusion London, and I think it's good to keep an eye on all those developments. I have a list of references I can send you in due course.
That would be really helpful, Judy, particularly because I know Caroline will be putting references into chat, but also into email. So that'd be really welcome. Thank you very much, Judy. I know that there was a lot for you to get through in the time that you had. So thank you. And I think that we may have some questions for you in the question and answer session. So please don't go away.
No, I won't.
So our next guest speaker may be familiar to some of you. She seems to have been around forever. Karen Foster, she's been the head of equality since 2019 for PCS. And prior to that, she was the secretary to the PCS National Disabled Members Forum as part of the equality team. Having been an activist in our predecessor unions, Karen's been involved with equality and the equality agenda her entire working life. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you very much, Jackie. I know you says I might have been here forever, but you've got to have been here forever as well to know that. Okay, I've got a couple of things that I was wanting to take the opportunity to say. And first of all, thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations to the National Disabled Members Forum. You have such a successful History Month. You have had some great events, great buy-in, and I'm just so pleased that it's all gone so well for you. But as they say, we have to know where we've been to know where we're going. So as this is History Month, I'm going to take the opportunity to talk a little bit about technology, actually, past, present and future. I'm going to provide some facts. Some you might know, some might surprise you. But I also want to touch a little bit on language as well, and that's actually where I'll start. 100 years ago, way back in 1920, we're looking back as far as that, the word robot was used for the first time. It was used in a play to refer to a fictional humanoid. Now, the word robot actually comes from the Czech language, and it translates to forced labour or work. And it's part of our everyday language. And how many of us knew that actual origin? So in 2013, in an Amazon warehouse, there were 1,000 robots. Now, in 2017, Amazon had 45,000 robots across 20 warehouses. Now, without getting into the politics of whether you like Amazon or not, I say that would take you back to the actual origins of the word for forced labour or work. But there are many organisations and companies other than Amazon that was with us today that we maybe don't always know about their beginnings. Samsung and Apple, they're the big two tech companies. But you'd be surprised to hear that Amazon was actually founded back in Samsung was actually founded way back in 1938 as a grocery store. So why am I raising that? Well, it's because it shows that Samsung is an organisation which has changed and followed the fashions and followed the trends. When Apple appeared back in the late 70s or mid 70s, they came right in at a high level of tech at that time and have continued to grow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some comparisons and I'll throw in some statistics. So when the radio was invented, it was a big deal. Some 100-year-old radios actually still work. That's if you can find the valves. But it took 38 years to reach an audience of 50 million people. Meanwhile, the iPod only took 3 years to reach the same milestone. We go to May 2019, the latest stats I could get on the 3 most Googled words. Have a think about what you think those 3 most Googled words are. I think you'll be surprised at how accurate you are. Facebook came top with 233 million searches. YouTube, 194 million searches. And you've guessed it, Amazon, 103 million searches. So Google, with over 35 billion searches each month. Many of them are me trying to reset my password. But of those, all the energy that goes into Google, they use quite a high percentage. One of the biggest places in the whole of the world for energy use. Yeah, it's a carbon neutral organisation. And every day, if you look at Facebook, 300 million photos are uploaded to Facebook, while 800 million likes are given out a day. So I'm only going to give you one more stat, and the ones I've given you might be a wow, but this next one really does make you think. Do you know that out of 7.7 billion people in the world, over 6 million of those have access to a mobile phone? Meanwhile, only 4.5 billion have access to working toilets. Now you look at the influence that technology has for us. It also provides an opportunity. Some of the facts show you the unprecedented demand for technology, and it will rise exponentially. Today's the slowest technology advancement will grow. Tomorrow it will be faster again and faster again. It'll also provide us with the opportunity when we're looking at campaigning for the social model rather than the medical model. Technology has had great advancements for those with additional needs and disabilities. A simple invention, for example, way back in 1964, which has been of great use to many of us, it was the first ever computer mouse. Now, being able to use that mouse changed how we use a computer. But back then it was made of wood and was maybe a little more green friendly. Voice recognition technology, now that's been a wonderful advancement for many people, but it actually goes back to 1952, and it only had, it would only recognise 8 digits. Now in the 90s, things changed for voice recognition technology for us to speak to our computer in a more advanced way. We have dragon technology and so on. But what many of us have in our life is Alexa. Now, Alexa's monitoring our every move, and we can get a wee bit uptight about that. But when we're putting 300 million photos on Facebook and we're looking up Google who have all our details all these times every day. It just shows you that there really isn't any privacy anymore. Other ways that we've been helped out with technology, they've got the special braille technology and accessories for blind people to use mobile phones. The special pins that go up and down for the user to touch and read. We use different fonts on our technology, our computers, our laptops and mobile phones to enable us to adapt to suit our requirements or preferences. They say Comic Sans is the most hated font, but its asymmetrical style actually is very good for some dyslexic people. We can also adapt our colours for those that are colourblind. For example, Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook owner, he is actually colourblind, red-green colourblind, so he chose blue for Facebook. So there's always a reason behind people using things. And we're talking about how the technology is just advancing to such an extent we actually can't imagine it. But Morse code, one of the early ways of transmitting information and the original email, if you like, they have also updated Morse code to include the @ so that you can send your email address to someone in Morse code. So it still exists, it's still useful, and it's enough for people to recognise. So what does all this have to do with Disability History Month? Well, much of today's technology and advancement is profit-led, but it's also opening doors to those of us who have got disabilities. We need to be part of that debate. We always say nothing about us without us, so let us be seen, be heard, and taken seriously. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Karen, and don't go away. Because I think somebody needs to be put back on mute, but don't go away, Karen, because we've got a question and answer session after the break. Malcolm, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Malcolm Chazelle. He's one of the hardest working members on the Disability Members Forum, the National Disability Members Forum. That's not to say that the others aren't hard working as well, but Malcolm's here today, so he'll hear me saying this. Malcolm's worked at the Land Registry for 17 years and is currently the chair of his local branch. He's a personal case rep with more years experience than he cares to admit. Well, I'm glad to know that, Malcolm, because I might be coming to you with some of my cases then. And also has been on his GEC for a number of years. He's been a member, as I said, of the National Disability Members Forum for about 5 years and has undertaken much of the employment law training offered by PCS. Malcolm's main reason for getting involved with PCS was to ensure fair treatment for members with disabilities. Welcome, Malcolm.
All right, thank you, Jackie, for that introduction and giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone here. It is a privilege to have this opportunity. Today, I would like to reflect on hidden or invisible disabilities, what they are, why it is important to discuss them with your manager within work, and the benefits that discussion can bring to you regarding your employment rights. To do this, I will also be addressing reasonable adjustments, what they are and how they affect you. At the beginning of July 2020, only 52.3% of people with a disability were in work. Just by having a job with a disability, you have already overcome one major hurdle. But the problems do not end there. Once within the workplace, the building, policies and procedures can also work against those with a disability, putting barriers in place to prevent them making the best of their employment opportunities. So to start, let's define what we mean by disability within the context of the law, specifically the Equality Act 2010. A disability is a physical or mental impairment that has substantial and long-term negative effect on your ability to do normal daily activities. Substantial is more than minor or trivial, e.g. it takes you much longer than it would usually to complete a daily task like getting dressed. Long-term means 12 months or more. for instance, a breathing condition that develops as a result of a lung infection. Things do get a bit more complicated when dealing with fluctuating conditions like arthritis and progressive conditions. There are also conditions such as HIV and epilepsy that mean that you are considered to have a disability from the moment you are diagnosed. So as you can see, in legal terms, what is a disability has already become complicated. But that, of course, is part of the fun of dealing with the law. So to move on to hidden disabilities, a hidden disability is one that is not obvious a person is suffering from just by looking at them. This includes things like mental health conditions, neurodiversity, ADHD, autism, etc., HIV, cancer, epilepsy, diabetes, and many more. Over half of the 13.5 million people in the UK with disabilities have these hidden disabilities. So I want to let you into something that's not so secret. I have hidden disabilities. I have suffered from moderate to severe depression most of my life. I have additional bolt-ons in the form of anxiety, paranoia, and a set of voices in my head that tell me I'm the worst person ever. Everything I do will fail, and I'm really just faking everything I do. Right now, they're telling me that this is going terribly, you're all bored out of your trees, and wish I'd just stop. In short, the inside of my head is mad as a box of frogs. I know some of you won't like that language. Some of you may feel offended by it. But it is one of the ways I cope with a myriad of problems, treating it as a joke, self-deprecation, and insulting myself. It's how I own my disability instead of it owning me. On Friday, I was asked if I would do this presentation. Did I think, wow, this will be a great opportunity to discuss something I am passionate about and an ability to develop new skills? Not on your life. I thought, wow, they must be desperate. Everyone else must have passed on this. Why do they want me to do this? Is it a test for me to fail so they can throw me off the committee for being useless? Cue 2 days of procrastination, mounting anxiety, and not getting much done. Yesterday, however, things changed. My colleague on the committee, Caroline Brown, who asked me to do this, took the time out to support me and address my concerns. It wasn't a major intervention on her behalf, just answering a couple of emails, but it was enough to help me get to a place where I can continue to do this. So why am I babbling on about me? Because you never know when you perceive somebody to be slow, don't communicate well, or have difficulty following instructions, if they have a disability you're unaware of. Something that is preventing them from behaving in the way you expect. As union members, we should try not to judge people in the workplace, but instead support them. If we come across somebody with a disability that's affecting the way they work, we should encourage them to request reasonable adjustments to mitigate the problem. With approximately 6 million people in the country with hidden disabilities, it is very likely you are working with one or two of them already without you knowing. Jumping to conclusions or shaming colleagues is not the behaviour of a union member. The final point I'd like to make here is, while we're spending the month highlighting the major steps we have made, recognising and making work better for disabled people, we should also be aware that we should be supporting them all year round, not just at times like these when there is a spotlight on their needs. Now I'm going to move on to the legal bit and your rights as a person with a disability, or how you can help with a disability as a rep. As a person with a disability, if your disability puts you at a disadvantage to someone without a disability, be that using the building, policies, or ways of working, you can make a reasonable adjustment to help overcome or mitigate these disadvantages. A common example of a reasonable adjustment is giving people with dyslexia more time to take exams to offset reading questions and writing answers, which may take them longer. You are seeing another example of a reasonable adjustment today insofar as you cannot see me. My paranoia means I don't like my image on the internet. It is reasonable to allow me to present without the camera on, to allow me to work in accordance with a restriction imposed on me because of my disability. Now, your employer must consider your request for a reasonable adjustment and give you a reason if it is declined. The key here is what is reasonable for your employer to do to assist you. What is reasonable for a big company may not be reasonable in a small startup. So often when requesting a reasonable adjustment, you may need to negotiate what the adjustment is. Now, the law has been in place for a while now, and as such, there's a good body of case law from tribunals indicating what could be considered reasonable for all sizes of organisation. Your employer needs to know you have a disability for you to ask for a reasonable adjustment. If you have a disability or are representing a member that has one, it is good practice for them to tell their employer about it. I know many people don't like discussing their disabilities, and in the case of mental health or neurodiverse conditions, may even be embarrassed about talking about the way it affects them. But it still protects a person more if they inform their employee about their condition. This is important because an employer has the legal obligation to provide reasonable adjustments for any disability it is notified of, or they should be aware of. In the case of obvious disabilities, the employer can see what is wrong, so are aware of it. In the case of hidden disabilities, if you don't tell them, they can claim that they were unaware of the disability and not put anything in place to help you. Just notifying an employer of your disability does not normally require your employer to do anything. However, if you ask for a reasonable adjustment, your employer may seek to confirm that you have the disability you are claiming to have. Again, it is reasonable for your employer to do this up to certain limits. Usually asking for a letter from the doctor to confirm you are being treated for something, or asking you to attend an occupational health referral is enough to satisfy the employer. When asking for a reasonable adjustment, you must be clear on what it is you're asking for, what part of the ways of working are causing you problems, and how the reasonable adjustment will offset that. It's vital to be as clear as possible, because if the request is refused and you end up going to tribunal, it is easier for the tribunal to identify if the employer was being unreasonable by not acting on it. Once the request has been made, the employer may want to seek specialist advice. This could result in you having to visit occupational health, or the employer researching if there are different options. The employer is allowed to suggest alternative to the original request, providing the alternatives address the core changes the original adjustment was seeking. Once a reasonable adjustment has been put in place, there is often a period of monitoring to see if it is having the desired effect. Often, you'll find that these reasonable adjustments do require tweaking or a fresh look if they have not resolved the issue. It is good practice for a person to keep a list of the adjustments they have requested and what they are for, just so they don't have to rehash the same issues if they were to move line manager. So, what happens if the employee comes to a rep and indicates they're about to face a disciplinary because of some aspect of their disability which has, for example, resulted in them not meeting production targets? While I'm sure all of you reps out there are going to gasp in horror that a member would come to you seeking help at the last minute, because that never happens, take a deep breath and start the fact finding. The process is essentially the same. Discuss with your member the disability and how it affects doing the job, sketch out some solutions, and then you can request that sketch out some solutions that you can request and either put them to management before the discipline meeting, or if it's more appropriate, at the meeting. I would recommend to all reps and members, if they have a reading the ACAS advice on declaring disabilities and reasonable adjustments. It's a great primer and gives you all the basic information you need when making a request with confidence. One final thing, if you hear somebody complaining about a person benefiting from adjustments in the workplace, traditionally this includes they can't do the job or need things to be made easier for them. Let them know that it's only there to mitigate something in the workplace that is stopping them performing to their full potential. Thank you for your time, and I hope you found something useful in this presentation.
Thank you, Malcolm, and you know, well done, because I know it's difficult sometimes speaking to time, but you've done brilliantly well. Thank you very, very much. So we're now going to go to the break, but the chat function is now working. So if you do have any questions, now's your opportunity during the break to submit those questions. But bearing in mind, we have got some questions, so don't worry if you can't think of anything. And if you think of something after the event, you can always email us at Equalities. Okay, so if you can all be back at 1 p.m, that'd be brilliant. Thanks very much. I'll see you soon. Right, hopefully you've all managed to get a cup of tea, coffee, water, whatever you're drinking. And we're just about to start again. And we've got some questions. I'll just give people a minute to join us. And while everybody's doing that, the three guest speakers will be getting a little bit nervous because they're going to be getting the questions.
Yes.
Yes, several cigarettes later.
Right. So we've got a question from Caroline Reed. Thank you, Caroline, because you're on, you're live at the moment. So we'll take your question first. I am a rep who also has a disability. We are having lots of working from home requests for staff with disabilities refused. This is despite it being requested as a reasonable adjustment, wholly possible due to the type of work done and supported by occupational health and other evidence. Do you have any pointers to improve outcomes and the stress of appeals and fighting the decisions, please? And we'll pass that to Malcolm.
Okay, this is not uncommon, despite legislation being in place. Employers do tend to be irritatingly obnoxious when it comes to this sort of thing. The best thing I can recommend to try and get the outcome you want is to look to see if there's any tribunal decisions for an organisation your size doing the same sort of thing that has said that working from home is a perfectly valid, reasonable adjustment. The reason I say that is because that effectively sets out case law to say that your employer refusing this is not acting in a reasonable manner, at which point you can threaten to take them to tribunal and they may behave in a better way. The only other thing you can do is to be very specific when you're outlining the benefits of this and understanding or speaking to somebody like me about what they're objecting to and seeing if we can come up with a counter argument to their objections. I'm sorry, the advice isn't much better than that, but it is what it is.
Your advice is absolutely fine, Malcolm. Don't worry about that. And I'm sure that Caroline will be able to use that. I can see that there's a hand gone up as well. Let me just check who that hand belongs to. I can't. So look at participants. Caroline, you've asked the question. So if you're not happy with the response, then what we would do is we'll take it away and get it further looked into. But Malcolm's advice is good advice. Is it a different question that you've got now?
It was just like an additional point, really.
Okay.
When they make the decision, I'm in Hmrc. I know a few people are in different departments, and we do have a contractual right now to work 40% at home anyway. So I don't understand why they make it so difficult. But they quote this this article that's on our intranet that's saying Hmrc is a business as an office-based organisation, and we expect the majority of you to spend at least some of your time in the office. And that's the only basis that they use to say no, and it just seems absolutely ludicrous.
Jackie, are you
Caroline,
okay? I just quickly.
Yeah, of course you can.
Thank you. Okay, so what I would do there is specifically find the bits of the job that the person can do in the office and say, okay, we'll do those in the office. They don't give any specification of how long you should be in the office in a week. So just by being in the office for part of the time, you have accommodated that. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be reasonable for the tasks that you've identified that would benefit from not being in the office to be done outside of the office.
Okay, thanks, Malcolm. And of course, Caroline, it would help if you have a rep, go and speak to your rep. Right, and interestingly, Caroline, I think you've submitted some more questions already, but we're going to take this question next, and it is for you, Judy.
Right.
Okay, so prepare yourself.
Okay.
Right. If the principles of the social model of disability hadn't been established in 1970 by the Union of the Physically Impaired Against Segregation, do you think the medical model of disability would still be followed by employers and in wider society now?
So, how do you say what wouldn't have happened? I mean, there was a lot of activity going on other than the UPS at the time, and things were growing internationally. So one can't say that nothing similar would have emerged at some point in the intervening period. I think it's very likely it would have done, because disabled people internationally were moving forward in their looking at the conditions they were struggling with. But I mean, I think in addition to that, what I would say is the medical model is still very dominant. It's still very prevalent. It's not gone away, and I think the social model is something. It's work in progress. You know, it's something that has to be. It's not a formula. It's not a rule book. It's something that's there to look at the world you're living in and reapply constantly and develop in the world we now are moving into. And I think that's very important. The social model for disabled people is the emancipatory way forward, and needs to be really battled for and hung on to and constantly worked for.
Okay, thanks, Judy. The next question, Karen, is for you. And again, it's from Caroline. Thank you, Caroline, for submitting questions in advance. How do we educate and inform members about hidden disabilities, and that those with them need to have these taken seriously? Similarly, how do we educate managers to recognise hidden disabilities and accept reasonable adjustments should be made?
Who's that for? Is that for?
That's for Karen.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't realise I was on mute there, sorry. Yeah, that's a very tricky question, because how can you get someone to recognise you have a hidden disability? The very term hidden makes it clear that you actually have to divulge that information if you're requesting any form of adjustments. There's two parts to that question, I suppose. There's one, how would you get your manager to provide the reasonable adjustments? Well, that's why HR are there, and that's why your trade union reps there. We're also looking at disability passports. There's an inclusion strategy at the Cabinet Office, and that inclusion strategy will be within weeks launched. It's a 3-year document, and as part of that we'll be looking about fully including all our disabled members and looking at the opportunities to improve the disability passport. So I think we're heading in the right direction there, but what we haven't got the answer to being able to educate people on it, other than when they want to be educated. We include equality issues in all our courses. They're all equality proofed. We have some specific disability ones and equality courses that stand on their own. Most of them link into personal cases. So other than our reps wanting to learn and use the information that we provide through our website and through our knowledge sites, then I don't see that there's some wonderful magic wand. It's a continual process, but I think we're heading in the right direction.
Thanks, Karen. So our next question, Malcolm, if you're okay, it's this question, Malcolm. I've just been diagnosed with dyslexia, a hidden impairment, and I'm struggling at work. What steps can I get to get support? What steps can I take to get support, Malcolm?
Okay, right. Well, the first thing you need to do is speak to your line manager to let him know that you've been diagnosed with dyslexia. Okay. Now, dyslexia is one of those conditions that once it's diagnosed, you automatically fall into the category of being disabled according to the Equality Act. So reasonable adjustments for that disability should be made available to you from the point that you request them and you let your line manager know. You can speak to your local reps, as they can help you frame the discussion that you have with your line manager. They may also have knowledge of other reasonable adjustments that have been put in place to help you understand what you can ask for. But predominantly, you need to think about what it is within the work environment that is causing you difficulties, and then identify ways you think they could be mitigated. Discuss those with your rep, and then speak to your line manager about them. There is some very useful advice on a website that I'm hoping Caroline will be able to put into the chat. It is from a manager's perspective, but it might give you some ideas of the sort of things that you can request that would be seen as reasonable to help with dyslexia. Hope that's okay.
Thanks, Malcolm. Question for you, Karen. Okay. How can I get more support for a discrimination case from PCS? And that's Abdul Bangura, who works for the Government Legal Department.
That's an excellent question. There's a recognition, particularly with the onset of the COVID pandemic, that some people were more affected than others. And although we were finding our way through the issues, we weren't finding our way through quickly enough. And the employers were at times just not being fair to those with disabilities or those with caring responsibilities. So what we did was look at the various different issues that were being brought to us. And we spoke with our legal department and our Assistant General Secretary department, and we recognised that of all our discrimination cases, 85% of them that we take up are actually disability cases, of all the discrimination ones, which it's not really that much of a surprise, because very often with disability discrimination, when you go as far as getting some legal advice, it's because you know the law has been broken. So we have now put in a system where when you're wanting a discrimination case taken forward for legal advice, perhaps employment tribunal, particularly because there are people getting dismissed on sick leave for exceeding limits, which is very often our disabled members, you no longer have to come across it's called the 50% threshold, but that's not what it is. It's basically likely to win the case. Now we're looking at putting a lot of our cases together to group them into particular areas and look at sending employment tribunals as test cases to take all the way through. Now we need to use more test cases. If anybody knows anything about ESOP, you will know that the ESOP is a case that provided a ruling that we should be using all the time. So I think within PCS, we are streamlining our internal systems so that we can deal with more cases. But the answer to that is to really make sure that we attend all the courses that are available and we use the guidance that's available to tackle the managers in the first place. Because when cases go as far as coming to our legal department or going to court, then the person that's had to take that case is already in a state of extreme distress. So we need to get the support right at the beginning to try and avoid the discrimination cases getting that far.
Thanks, Karen. The next question is for Judy. You ready for this, Judy?
I'll do my best.
What more can we do to promote the use of the social model of disability at work and in society?
I mean, a lot of it's about explaining what it means, why it's important, what the distinction is between looking at the environment as the place where barriers are created. It's not that it comes with your impairment. It's not your impairment that is we're talking about the way you see yourself as being disabled. What it is that is out there, the barriers that are in your way. In fact, adding to what people have been saying so far. So it is actually drawing attention to those barriers and why they prevent you from, or you or others in the workplace from functioning fully, and what can be done about it. And that is, again, there's a huge body of knowledge out there, isn't there, from people's experience. It's about not being isolated, coping on your own, but drawing on that body of knowledge from other people, people in the workplace, your trade unions, who can advise on how you can expand people's awareness and understanding and information, and your own actually as well, isn't it? It's about knowing what's possible yourself. So it's an ongoing process, but I come back to being with other people, not on your own with the problem. It's really, really crucial, I think. The principle of unionisation, of collectivisation, terribly important.
Thank you, Judy. And, you know, it is important to be in a union because we're stronger together. Karen, I've just got a quick question for you, and it is, how does a person find out about employment tribunal decisions?
Employment tribunal decisions are a matter of public record. It depends what it is you're looking for, because employment tribunals are open to the public. It's very rare that you would get a closed case. If you know what the subject matter is, you would. I'm going to refer you back to the 45 million hits to Google, or 35 million hits to Google, but don't underestimate how good that is. If you're looking for something or someone in particular, you should be able to find that out from the local tribunal service. If it's a matter of record, then it should be there. But we've also got some employment tribunals don't have the outcomes that we're looking for, and they get taken to appeal in the next stage, and eventually can become case law. Where when it gets to that stage, then of course that's it's a matter of case law for us to refer to for any similar cases like ESOP that I mentioned earlier. I have to say I have never had to look for the outcome of a case that I wasn't personally involved in, so therefore got told the outcome. So I'm maybe going to have to take that away with me.
That's absolutely fine, Karen. I think your advice is right. Look, Google, because Google has the answer to everything. If I believed everything I read on Google, though, I'd be hospitalised with, no hope for me. Right, I can see that Malcolm has his hand up. Malcolm, I've got another question for you, but do you want to add something to what Karen was saying?
Yes, PCS do produce some booklets that do summarise recent case law and tribunal decisions. So you can always subscribe to those. at your branch level.
Okay, thanks for that, Malcolm. Right, Malcolm, don't take yourself off mute because I've got another question for you. And it is, by my reckoning, this one. Will occupational health processes be addressed within Hmrc? Now, I think, Malcolm, it's difficult to say what would happen in Hmrc, but, you know, all employers in the civil service should be behaving in the same way because they have a CSET policy. Managers are advised to repeat occupational health assessments every 6 months without any consultation with the individual. There seems to be no understanding on how the process can impact on individuals' well-being. And that's from Tony Smith, who works in Hmrc. Malcolm, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. First of all, I can safely say that that definitely doesn't happen at HM Registry. So despite the fact there being overall guidance, it looks like Hmrc is being rather enthusiastic about things. We see this with things like access to work, what Hmrc is doing here. It's basically trying to prevent people claiming their rights by over vigorously monitoring them and making the entire thing a pain in the neck. Now, as far as reasonable adjustments in occupational health are concerned, once you've had that initial decision, provided things don't change, there should be no need to go back to occupational health. Your line manager might want to ask you each year at your end of year whether the things that have been put in place are working for you or if they need to change. But again, there's no need to go to occupational health unless you request it. Also, tribunals tend to take a very dim view of this as well. So it might be worthwhile mentioning that to HR in Hmrc. And I believe there is a couple of tribunal decisions that have gone on effectively management making too much of an effort to ascertain that somebody has a disability and was thus intrusive into their lives doing it.
That's really helpful, Malcolm. Thanks. And it is about what, you know, if you have a disability, then the chances are it's going to be the same, if not worse, during your lifetime. So it seems to me that they're wasting a lot of money going back to occupational health for information that's just going to be repeated. But do speak to your union reps, those of you who are in Hmrc. Now, Kelly, you didn't ask a question, but I thought I'd just share this in case people didn't have access to chat. And what Kelly says is, in the DWP guidance, it states, possible working from home as a reasonable adjustment, or this is not often considered or refused. Some colleagues have been working from home since the start of the pandemic. It would seem that it's reasonable to be able to continue considering disability or on health grounds. Absolutely right, Kelly. And in lots of departments, people have, because it suited the employer, been able to work from home, and it doesn't suit the employer when they're trying to get people back into the workplaces, of course. But we know that it can be done now, and we've got evidence that supports that. So that makes the case for working from home easier than it would have been pre-pandemic. So the pandemic has been good for one thing, and that one thing has been it's proved that you can actually do work from home, and you know the world doesn't stop because of a pandemic. There's ways around it. Okay, Karen, we've got one final. I think this is the final question. It is, what more can trade unions do to support members with hidden or invisible disabilities stroke impairments?
Well, the answer to just about everything what trade unions can do is recruit, become active, get a friend to join, make sure we have as many members as possible, therefore we have as big a voice and a strong voice. When it comes to hidden or invisible disabilities or impairments, again, I'll say that sometimes it just depends on whether you are actually going to be open about your disability or impairment. And I'm just going to finish with a little example on that, if it's okay, Jackie. And that was, for those who don't know, I wear hearing aids. Without hearing aids, I struggle extremely hard. It's very difficult. And with people wearing face masks, and I can't see people speak, I find it very difficult. Now, I can take you back a couple of years, and I was at a conference that Jackie was at, and I lost a hearing aid. And I didn't want to tell anybody in the delegation that I'd lost the hearing aid, because having the disability and making a joke or being honest about it was one thing, but when I actually had to deal with that disability for losing the support, when I lost the support I have, it was very, very difficult to admit that. So I think what I would take from that is that if you have a hidden disability and you are actually getting the support you need, then it's easier to be open about it. If you're not getting the support, then it's a difficult thing for you to broach. So the more people who are open about their disabilities, the more comfortable others will be. But make sure as many people join the unions, become active, become advocates, and make sure your voice is heard.
Thanks, Karen. And I think that's, if you could just put yourself back at, that's it, because otherwise I get an echo. I don't know if anybody else does. I think that's a good point to end our seminar on today. And I would really like to thank our guest speakers, Malcolm, Karen and Judy. Judy, I understand your book, there will be a link in chat, so people can go out, and who knows, Judy, come Christmas, it might be the #1 bestseller if we keep this going, because we've got another session tonight. But I would like to thank the guest speakers. It's not easy when you're trying to speak and keep to time, and also answer questions that you're going into cold. So well done, all three of you, for doing that for us. And I'd like to thank Bal and Danny behind the scenes, who were operating chat and sending me questions, and Caroline Brown, who has done a phenomenal amount of work to put all the seminar sessions together. It's down to Caroline really that everything runs fairly smoothly. I'm there really to disrupt her smooth running order at times, but she has done a cracking job, I think. And you do have an opportunity. There is one more session tonight, but this time it's on Zoom. So if you want to come along to tonight's session, we will have similar, well, we have the same guest speakers, so it will be like watching it a little bit on repeat, but this time I won't be thinking of where I live, I'll be thinking of the people's names properly, and hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother for me, if not for anybody else. So I get to have another go at this. Again, it's going to be recorded, so then you can select whether you want the one with the edited version or the one with the ones where it should have been deleted part of it. But thank you for attending, because I know this is probably over your lunch time, and tonight we start at 6 o'clock. So anybody interested in attending or telling your friends and colleagues, they can, as long as they're PCS members, they can attend, because we're opening it up to people who do not have disabilities, because it's important for them to understand what it is like, what the constant battle is for people who do have disabilities, whether they're physical, mental, or whether they can be seen or whether they're hidden. It's really important that we have the support of everybody going forward. So thanks for coming, and I might see some of you. I'm hoping I'll see 3 of you at least tonight at 6 o'clock. So I'll see you all soon. Bye.